Resident Evil has seen it all, and to some extent been it all. The series has gone through so many changes and tried so many different gameplay styles that nailing down exactly what defines the series differs from person to person. However, there is one thing that's never changed, one thing that's been a common thread, always by your side, and ready to save your life at a moment's notice. Of course, I'm talking about the trusty knife. In this video, we'll showcase your last best line of defense in Resident Evil. While the knife has remained pretty consistent throughout the years, it, like the series itself, has evolved to fit with every game's specific style. I'm Adam from First Aid Spray, and this is the top 5 knives in Resident Evil. The classic, Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3. The knife in the original trilogy of games was always meant to be your last option. It was often one of the only things in your inventory at the start of each game, a lifeline tossed to players after the ominous opening cinematic. It doesn't do much damage, often taking many swipes to secure a kill on a basic zombie, and its long animation and extremely short range make it dangerous to rely upon. But it isn't without its uses. When elevated, swiping down at a group of approaching zombies can topple an oncoming horde, allowing you a moment to rush past your incapacitated foes. While this is helpful, the game is filled with options that are often better, and most people usually take that route on their path through the game. However, the restrictiveness and challenge of using the knife, and only the knife, still exists, and Resident Evil gives birth to a very unique and still prominent type of challenge, the knife only run. Just be sure to keep some herbs handy for when things get hairy. Resident Evil Deadly Silence. We've previously talked about how fantastic this handheld port of the first Resident Evil is, so it should be no surprise that it's featured on our list. We love Deadly Silence because whilst it is incredibly faithful to the original game in many ways, it was also given some optional yet very welcome quality of life improvements. Relevant to this list specifically is the ability to pull out your knife on command at the press of a button. In addition to this looking cool, it also means that the knife didn't take up an inventory space. It doesn't make the knife better than it was, but it's great to have something to defend yourself with at a moment's notice at all times. And of course, Rebirth mode features several first-person knifing sections, but more on that kind of thing in just a bit. Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 was a big change for the series in a whole lot of ways. Its shift to an over-the-shoulder third-person view made it for a much more action-oriented experience. But the reason it appears on our list is because that change of perspective enabled RE4 to be the first game to give players the ability to actively aim their weapons at specific body parts. This included the knife. It was also the first game to map the knife to its own button. Pressing the shoulder button causes Leon to pull out his knife and get ready to start some stabby action. This knife is beyond useful. In addition to being fairly damaging in itself, Leon can use it to open containers around the map, swipe oncoming projectiles out of the air, and it's actually the ideal way to beat Krauser in his mutated form. While the gameplay style change means a knife-only run sadly isn't possible in Resident Evil 4, it definitely became way more versatile to make up for it. Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles. Deadly Silence wouldn't be the only time that Resident Evil would have us waging war against oncoming hordes with a knife from the first-person perspective. A year later, Umbrella Chronicles hit the store shelves. Retelling various stories from the universe through a new lens, lots of classic elements came back and the knife was not left behind. With a touch of the trigger and a swipe of the Wiimote, players could swipe a blade left and right across the screen. While this might not be the most ideal way to deal with most foes, it does serve a purpose against many minor threat, think bugs, spiders, crows and so on. Slashing wildly left to right during specific scenes is less like attacking and more like a defensive force field, as because of the on-rail shooter nature of the game, enemies can only attack from the front and thus get caught in the whirlwind of your blade. Is it the most fun gameplay dynamic? Certainly not, but it works and that's what matters. Resident Evil 2 Remake. 2019's Resident Evil 2 Remake was the breath of fresh air the series needed in order to be thrust back into the spotlight. Beloved by fans and critics alike, Remake 2 paved the way for a bright future for the series. But what about that knife though? In RE2, knives are not only a commodity that degrade over time, but they're also relegated back to taking up space in your inventory. Don't let that get you down because the knife is absolutely worth its slot. Not only is it incredibly effective at hacking off the limbs of zombies to slow them down, or stun lock a licker so you can slash it to death, the knife also shows the return of the defensive weapons to the series, and can be used in a spot of danger to save your life. We're giving this appearance an honourable mention in this list, however, because the true extent of its power changes depending on how you play the game. Exclusive to the PC version of Remake 2, players can modify the game's graphical settings in order to unlock the game's frame rate. The higher the frame rate, the more damage your knife does, and this can cut in half the number of strikes it takes to take out an enemy, making it an absolute killing machine. Resident Evil Code Veronica. To say that the knife got its first little buff in Code Veronica would be an understatement. While it's meant to be your last line of defense, there was seldom a reason to leave it behind in this particular entry. 2 slashes will normally knock a zombie to the ground, with a particularly well-timed strike securing 2 hits on the way down. It's not uncommon to be able to finish off a zombie entirely before they're able to get up due to the sheer amount of damage contained within its blade. Code Veronica is also able to generate more zombies on screen than any previous game in the series, so being able to use the knife to cut a swathe through Rockfort Island is a refreshing change of pace. If you were ever curious about attempting a knife-only run, it seems that Code Veronica would be the best place to start due to how ridiculously OP it is. Which is funny considering that it's one of the very few times that players aren't given it and can technically leave it in the Rockfort jail cells forevermore. So there you have it. First Aid Spray's list of top 5 knives in Resident Evil. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with the podcast and all of our video comment. This is Adam for First Aid Spray, and have a week.